people say Christmas miracles arrive wrapped in warmth and hymns, but the one that came to Elijah Cade's ranch arrived half dead, pounding on his door like the devil himself was behind her. The blizzard outside was a white wall of roaring wind, the kind that swallowed riders whole and buried towns before dawn. Elijah almost ignored it. No one traveled this far out on Christmas Eve unless they carried trouble. The knocking came again, weaker now, followed by a broken whisper. "Please, I can't breathe." He threw the door open, and a young woman collapsed into his arms, dress torn, hair soaked with ice, her skin as cold as riverstone. She clutched a crumpled envelope against her chest, as if it were her last heartbeat. When Elijah carried her inside and set her near the fire, her eyelids fluttered open, revealing frightened, pleading eyes. "Are you Elijah Cade?" she whispered. "I came because you sent for me. I'm your bride." His stomach tightened, because Elijah Cade had never sent for anyone, and whatever brought her here didn't feel like fate. It felt like a setup. As the storm slammed against the cabin walls, he realized the real danger wasn't outside. It had just collapsed at his feet. Once Lily's shivering eased and color returned to her cheeks, Elijah finally asked how she found his name. She uncrumpled the soaked envelope she'd been clutching, hands trembling as she passed it to him. The front was addressed to Cade Ridge Ranch, ink-streaked but legible, and inside was a marriage letter, written in a slanted hand Elijah recognized instantly. Promises of land, a wedding before Christmas morning, and a new life signed in his full name, Elijah Robert Cade. His pulse tightened. It wasn't his handwriting, but someone who knew him well had forged every stroke with cruel accuracy. Lily watched him read, her voice soft as thawing snow. "I boarded a stagecoach in Cheyenne because your letter said you needed a wife before winter ends, and that you'd keep me safe." Elijah swallowed hard, anger and guilt tangling in his chest, not at her, but at the ghost of a man he'd sworn he'd never see again. "You were lied to," he said, breath rough, "but not by me." Outside, the wind howled like wolves circling the cabin walls, hungry and patient. If you've come this far, partner, go on and hit subscribe. This story's only getting darker. As Elijah folded the forged letter, he realized the handwriting belonged to the one man who knew every secret he'd buried, his brother. All through the night the storm grew wilder while the house grew warmer. Lily sat near the fire, wrapped in one of Elijah's old wool blankets, cheeks flushed with heat instead of frostbite now, watching him with guarded eyes. She told him how she'd found the advertisement in a Cheyenne boarding house. God-fearing rancher seeks wife before Christmas, room, board, and share of land in exchange for honest heart. It sounded nothing like Elijah Cade, the man who'd spent 3 years alone by choice. She'd written back, received that forged letter, and boarded a stagecoach with the last of her savings, chasing a future she thought was meant for her. Elijah listened, all the while feeling that old, familiar ache scraping at his ribs. 3 years ago, his younger brother Jesse had dragged his name through every saloon and gambling hall in the territory before disappearing in a cloud of trouble. The handwriting, it was his. "There's only one man who knew enough about me to pull this stunt," Elijah muttered, staring at the letter again. "My brother." Lily's eyes widened. "Then where is he?" Elijah looked to the frost-laced window where the storm swallowed the world. "If Jesse sent you here," he said quietly, "he ain't far behind, and he never shows up without a debt chasing him." By Christmas morning, the storm broke, leaving the ranch buried in clean white quiet. Smoke curled from the chimney, and somewhere far off, a church bell in town tried bravely to ring through the cold air. Lily moved carefully around Elijah's small kitchen, sleeves rolled up, cooking with a confidence that didn't quite hide the way she flinched at every creak of the floorboards. He could see past her practiced smile, The girl was running from something just as surely as Jesse was running toward them. Over coffee at the rough-hewn table, Elijah finally asked, "What were you leaving behind, Lily Hart?" Her fingers tightened around the chipped mug. "A man who thought buying a woman meant owning her soul," she said, voice low. "The moment I saw that advertisement, it felt like a door opening. I didn't care if it was a stranger or a small, cold ranch. I just needed it to be mine. A fresh start." Elijah understood that more than she knew. Out here, the land was brutal but honest. It took everything from you, but it didn't lie about it. People, though, that was different. "We'll get your fresh start," he said. "But first we have to find out what kind of mess my brother dropped on both our heads." And as if the thought summoned it, the distant crunch of hooves on frozen ground echoed through the still morning. Elijah stepped out onto the porch, shotgun in hand, coat thrown over his shoulders, breath curling in the sharp Christmas air. 3 riders approached through the snow, dark shapes against the blinding white. Lily hovered just inside the doorway, one hand gripping the doorframe, eyes wide. The man in front wore a familiar slouch in his saddle, hat tipped low, bandana hiding most of his face, but Elijah would have known Jesse's cocky posture if the man had been nothing but bones. Behind him rode 2 others with rifles across their laps, and mean in their eyes. They didn't look like brothers. They looked like collectors. "Merry Christmas, Eli," Jesse called as they neared, voice as reckless as ever. "Heard you finally decided to settle down." His gaze slid to Lily, standing small and stiff in the doorway. "And she's even prettier than you described." Elijah's grip tightened on the shotgun. "You forged my name," he growled. "You dragged her into whatever trouble you're in." "Why?" Jesse just smiled, that half-charming, half-terrifying grin of his. "Because I needed leverage," he said softly enough that only Elijah caught it. "And because those men behind me don't believe in Christmas miracles." If this story has you hooked, tap subscribe. There's more snow, sin, and secrets coming. One of the riders spat into the snow and said, "We're here for the girl and the gold, Cade. Which one you hand over first is up to you." Lily had known fear before, but never like this. Never with 2 strangers' rifles pointed casually toward her chest, while snowflakes drifted between them like slow, silent ash. Inside, Elijah motioned her back with a small shake of his head, but she stayed where she was, lips pressed together to keep them from trembling. Jesse swung off his horse, boots crunching in the snow, and sauntered up to the porch like he was coming home for pie. "Calm down, boys," he told the gunman. "We're just talking business." Elijah didn't lower his shotgun. "There's no business here for you," he said. "You lied. You used my ranch, my name, and her, just to buy yourself breathing room." Jesse's eyes flicked to Lily, and for a brief moment there was something like regret there. "Those men are from Red Rock," Lily whispered, recognizing the brand on their coats. "They work for Mr. Kavanaugh. He's the one I ran from." Elijah understood then. Jesse had intercepted the letters, lured her here, and sold both of them as collateral. "She doesn't belong to any man," Elijah said loudly enough for all to hear. The riders chuckled like it was the funniest thing they'd heard all week. One of them leveled his rifle a little higher and said, "Out here, Cade, whoever holds the gun decides who belongs to who." The standoff cracked the Christmas morning wide open. Elijah felt every choice he'd ever made, balancing on the icy porch boards. Stay quiet, hand Lily over, let his brother live another day, or draw a line in the snow he couldn't ever step back over. Lily stepped forward before he could answer, blanket slipping from her shoulders, chin lifting despite the tremble in it. "Mr. Kavanaugh doesn't own me," she said, voice clear as the cold. "He bought my passage, not my heart." One of the gunmen snorted. "You cost him money, girl. That makes you his business." Jesse's gaze darted between Elijah and the men behind him, calculations flying behind those restless eyes. "Eli," he muttered, "just let them take her back. Once they've got what they came for, they'll leave you alone. You always did prefer a quiet life." Elijah looked at Lily, this woman he hadn't asked for, who'd been tossed at his doorstep by fate and lies, and saw in her the same thing that once drove him from town, the refusal to be owned. "I'd rather have an honest war than a quiet life built on surrender," he said. Then he stepped off the porch toward the guns, choosing his side, and for the first time Jesse realized his brother might be more dangerous than any outlaw in Red Rock. What followed happened fast, like the land itself held its breath. One rider twitched his rifle toward Lily, and Elijah moved without thinking, knocking the barrel aside as it fired. The shot cracked the stillness, splintering a porch post and sending birds erupting from the cottonwoods by the creek. Jesse swore and dove for cover as the second gunman swung his aim toward Elijah's chest. Lily reacted on instinct. She grabbed the cast-iron skillet from beside the stove and hurled it through the open doorway, slamming it into the man's wrist with a sickening clang. His rifle dropped into the snow. Elijah drove his shoulder into the first rider, sending them both tumbling off the porch. In the chaos, Jesse snatched up the fallen rifle, and for a heartbeat, Elijah thought he'd turn it on him. Instead, Jesse leveled it at Kavanaugh's remaining man, eyes hard. "I said we're talking business," he snapped. "You start shooting on my brother's land again, and I'll charge you extra for the funeral." If you're still here, partner, hit that subscribe button. This Christmas war on the range is just getting started. Lily watched the brothers stand back to back in the snow and realized with a shiver that she'd stumbled into something far more tangled than a simple Christmas proposal. By mid-afternoon, the immediate danger had passed, but peace was a thin layer over deep cracks. The two gunmen rode off with promises to return, and this time they'd be bringing Kavanaugh himself. Jesse paced the length of the small front room, like a caged animal that had suddenly realized the bars were his own bad choices. "I was gonna fix it before they got here," he muttered. "I thought if you married her like the letter said, Kavanaugh would see you as respectable, less likely to fight." Elijah barked out a humorless laugh. "You thought selling my name and her future was a kindness?" Jesse winced. Lily sat at the table, fingers tracing the rim of her mug, head bowed. "I don't need a marriage of convenience to save me," she said quietly. "I need men who will tell the truth, even when it costs them." Her words hit harder than any bullet. Elijah looked at her then, really looked, at the courage that had carried her through miles of snow and years of being treated like property. "You have that now," he said. "I don't know how this ends, but I won't let him drag you back." Outside, church bells from town rang a slow, solemn carol, and with each toll Elijah felt time running out before Kavanaugh arrived to collect what he thought was his. The sky turned molten gold, then deep indigo, Christmas night settling over the range with quiet that felt like the pause before a gunshot. Kavanaugh never came, not that night. Maybe the storm, maybe Jesse's warning, maybe the realization that Cade Ridge would not bow as easily as every other soul he'd bought. But Elijah knew men like that didn't forget debts. Inside the warm glow of the cabin, Lily stood by the frosted window, watching the distant pinpricks of town lanterns flicker like fallen stars. "I thought Christmas would feel different," she murmured. Elijah stepped beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed. "Maybe it does," he said. "Maybe this is what it feels like when you stop running and decide where you'll make your stand." Jesse lingered in the doorway, hat in his hands, eyes shadowed. "I'm riding out at first light," he announced. "I'll draw Kavanaugh's heat away from here. I made this mess. Time I lived with it instead of making you both pay." For once, there was no smooth grin, no easy charm, just a man tired of the weight of his own legend. Lily turned to Elijah. "Where does that leave us?" she asked, voice soft but steady. He met her gaze, something warm and dangerous sparking there. "It leaves us with a forged proposal, a Christmas Eve you survived, and a choice," he said. "We can pretend this was all a mistake, or we can write our own truth, right here on this land." The wind sighed against the house like a blessing, carrying the faint echo of distant carols. And as Lily slipped her hand into his, she knew this wasn't the end of the story at all. It was the first chapter of a frontier love and war that would pull them both into a fate even wilder than the Christmas storm that brought her to his door.